morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Dani Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Tuesday. Philippine Competition Commission Chairperson Arsenio Balisacan will return to his old post as NEDA chief with hopes of bringing the Philippines back to a high-growth trajectory.
Presumptive President Bongbong Marcos will push for a stimulus measure in the next Congress, but he admits potential funding sources are still being studied.
A new round of oil price adjustments takes effect today. Diesel prices are down by 2 pesos per liter, while gas prices increased by 4 pesos a liter.
And as COVID-19 cases start to rise again, Presidential Advisor Joey Concepcion pushes for a wider coverage of the rollout of the second booster shot. We begin our broadcast with presumptive President Bongbong Marcos finally naming a member of his economic team.
Arsenio Balisacan is returning as NEDA chief, a post which he held under the late former President Noynoy Aquino. Marlene Alcaide with the rest of the story.
A little over a month before his proclamation, presumptive President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s cabinet is slowly taking shape. One of the latest to join is Cavite 7th District Representative Boying Remulla, who accepted the offer to be the next Justice Secretary.
Pag tinawag ka ng Pangulo, di ba, paano ka tatanggi? It's a very rare opportunity given to a lawyer like us.
Marcos Jr. cited Remulla's years in public service as his primary consideration.
He has a great many years of experience in government, number one, and what many people do not know is that he's actually a very, very good lawyer. And so I think he will fit very nicely into the DOJ.
But Remulla just got re-elected in his district. He says he is willing to leave his post, opening two scenarios for Cavite's 7th District. Either a special election is held or a caretaker is assigned. Aside from Remulla, Marcos Jr. also finally named a member of his economic team. He tapped former National Economic and Development Authority Chief Arsenio Balisacan to lead NEDA once again. He previously headed the agency during the Aquino administration. Marcos's camp confirmed that Balisacan agreed to take on the role.
Mukha namang tumutugma ang aming pag-iisip tungkol sa approach natin dito sa mga darating na ilang taon when it comes to the economic managers.
Marcos's spokesperson, Attorney Vic Rodriguez, also confirmed that former Labor Chief Bienvenido Laguesma and migrant workers advocate Toots Ople agreed to head the Labor and Migrant Workers Departments respectively. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
Arsenio Balisacan says he accepted the offer of presumptive President Bongbong Marcos to return to NEDA, that is to help meet the challenges of the economy. Balisacan, who is currently the chairperson of the Philippine Competition Commission, says he is mindful of what he describes as immense work needed to fast-track economic recovery as well as post-recovery development. Balisacan served as NEDA chief from 2012 to 2016. In becoming the Socio-Economic Planning Secretary once again, Balisacan says he will work with the economic team and the private sector to bring the Philippines back to its pre-pandemic high-growth trajectory and to reduce poverty and inequality.
A new stimulus measure will be part of the priority legislation of Bongbong Marcos for the 19th Congress. However, Marcos Jr. admits that they are still studying potential sources of revenue. The presumptive president says he will look at the 2023 national budget to, quote, find sufficient funds for the proposed stimulus package. Marcos Jr. said he is also not considering selling government assets to fund this measure.
We have to look at that to find sufficient funds for the things that we want to do. Kasi talaga, basically, move some public expenditure away from non-investment expenditures to more investment-led expenditures. Again, to revitalize, to retool the economy.
Presumptive President Bongbong Marcos met with several diplomats to discuss various national concerns, including infrastructure projects and the fate of the Bataan nuclear power plant.
What does the next administration have to say about this? Let's find out in this report by mobile journalist Julie Baiza.
Presumptive President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. met with 4 diplomats, beginning with Japanese Ambassador Koshikawa Kazuhiko. The two discussed infrastructure projects under the Japan International Cooperation Agency, as well as the deployment of Filipinos to Japan. South Korean Ambassador Kim In-chul also paid a courtesy visit. They talked about the revival of the Bataan nuclear power plant amid the country's power supply problems.
At yung nakapunta na rito ng mga expert na nuclear power para tignan ang Bataan Nuclear Power Plant para makita kung ano ba ang maaring gawin. We will now study their recommendations and their findings.
High-tech farming, medicine manufacturing, and microfinance for small businesses were the agenda during Indian Ambassador Shambhu Kumaran's visit. Lastly, in a courtesy call with U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Heather Variava, climate change and the Mutual Defense Treaty with the U.S. were the topics.
Pinag-usapan namin the return or the re-signing or the extension of the VFA agreement and how it has to be redefined for the near future.
Mobile journalist Julie Baiza, We Are One News.
Appointed NEDA chief for the incoming administration, Arsenio Balisacan, will take on an economy that has been heavily battered by the pandemic. But this is not new to him, as he had once been the country's economic architect. To get his thoughts about Balisacan's appointment and what's in store for the next administration, we have Stephen Cochrane, chief economist for Asia Pacific over at Moody's Analytics. Good morning, Stephen. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
All right. Your thoughts first on Balisacan's appointment here for NEDA. I mean, he previously led the agency during the Aquino administration, a period in which most experts would say is a period of remarkable growth here for the Philippine economy. Does that in any way give you confidence about where the economic policies might be headed under Marcos Jr.?
Well, I think the fact that somebody being brought in who's got this depth of experience in economic development planning in the past is a really good move. It seems like the experience is solid. The direction that was taken in the past was very effective, as you mentioned, in terms of creating some pretty good economic growth in the past. So I think it's a really nice initial move.
Okay, Stephen, let's talk about the policies that presumptive President Marcos Jr. might be continuing or not here. You know, a lot had voted him on the fact that it was a continuation of the Duterte administration, but in fact, he said several things. For instance, tax measures, he might be reversing or changing, amending the rice tariffication law. He's also not wanting to sell the government assets to fund the fiscal deficit. He also wants to reconnect with the U.S., presumably, versus the Duterte stance, which was more China-centric. Your thoughts on those?
Lots of issues there. It does seem like he's charting out a little bit of a new path. I think that's refreshing. I think the fact that there will be some balance and links between China and the U.S. is good. Frankly, I think that's the way so many of the ASEAN countries are trying to move right now, is to create a fairly good balance and manage trade with both the U.S. and China. I mean, that's in the best economic interest of the region. So that seems very, very good. I think when you're looking at economic policy, I think you need to look at the strengths and then some of the risks that the economy faces right now. When you look at the economy, there are a number of strengths. One is that the labor market is improving, the unemployment rate is coming down, and I think there needs to be good support to make sure that the labor market continues to improve, to provide retraining and opportunities for people who lost jobs during the pandemic. There's a lot of people who still are not completely back in the labor force. And then longer term, just maintaining very, very broad education programs to make sure there's a high quality labor force available. Exports are looking good out of the Philippines. They're very stable. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of much of a hit from any supply chain disruptions in China yet. High-tech, high-value exports look pretty good. I think there has to be some focus on maintaining that pattern. This is where some of the infrastructure development can come in to make sure that ports and airports and such are free of any obstacles and any supply chain disruptions. And that relates to industrial production that is pretty strong as well. I think a couple of risks that the economy faces. One is that Foreign investment is still rather low in the Philippines compared to where it was pre-pandemic, and I think this is an area where there can be a lot of emphasis, both bringing foreign investment to complement the domestic investment that the president-elect is talking about. And finally, I think the big issue is inflation, and there has to be work done to make sure that particularly domestic-related inflation related to high food prices and such can be addressed and addressed as quickly as possible.
Okay, Steve, your thoughts here on another stimulus bill here, at least the first, probably, under the Marcos administration. I mean, you have his cousin expected to be the next Speaker of the House proposing another stimulus measure called BBM, or Bayan Bangon Muli. But then you have other lawmakers pointing out that he has little room here for budgeting for the rest of the year, considering that 90% of the government's budget has already been disbursed. Your thoughts on where perhaps the next administration could at least find sources to fund that, and what exactly would a new stimulus bill do for the economy?
The stimulus bill is an issue that is a very I guess I want to say it's a very important issue in the Philippines and really around the region as well, because so many countries face the problem that the Philippines has, is that the deficits have risen coming out of the pandemic. There's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of budget, particularly on the current budget, as you mentioned, because expenditures have already been made. I think they had to find ways to very, very carefully target expenditures towards investment and towards the labor force. I would say those would be the two highest priorities that could be made in the very near term in order to keep economic growth on its recovery path and really ensure that the economy picks up steam over the next 12 to 18 months or so.
Stephen, what's the difference? Some are touting that this is just a renaming of Bayanihan 1, Bayanihan 2 change. What difference is this BBM bill stimulus gonna really do? And did you do, or would you prefer just a continuation of the stimulus bills already in place in President Duterte's term?
Well, the stimulus bills that President Duterte had proposed, I thought were fairly much on target, particularly as they were focused on bringing investment back into the country and infrastructure and such. And I think those are aspects that still need to be continued. So I don't expect that there will be a big change coming out of this any new program. Again, there's just not a lot of room to be funding any new programs. One has to be very, very careful in terms of both managing the deficit, but providing investment and targeted support where possible.
Okay, and you did mention earlier on inflation being your key concern here, and the BSP has been the one doing all the heavy lifting, recently tightening as well. I mean, what more can be done from the fiscal side to battle this inflation, especially since it's supply side driven?
This is a tough situation because the supply side driven inflation is kind of a new situation that we're not used to dealing with. I do think that the BSP will continue to raise interest rates. It's about the only tool that it has in its quiver, if you will, to fight inflation, and they'll likely continue raising the policy interest rate through the course of the year. In terms of fiscal policy, I mentioned that a big component, aside from the imported inflation through high energy prices and then high transport prices and fuel and such, the other side of inflation is food. Some of that is imported through higher edible oil prices and higher wheat prices. But I think anything the government can do to ensure that food production and the distribution of food around the country is managed without any interruption, and longer term, making sure the safety of the food supply is guaranteed, so that there aren't any shortages, say in terms of pork, that have been experienced in the past.
Steve, how much do you see the BSP raising rates here for the rest of the year, even up to 2023?
I think it's not. I don't think it's difficult to see that the BSP might raise rates by 25 basis points, maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times by the end of the year. I think a policy rate of 3% or maybe something slightly above 3% is fairly reasonable to expect by the end of 2022.
Okay, and finally, just before we let you go, some recent issues here on a possible new variant entering the country. Can we afford another wave?
This is a critical aspect. It has to be handled very, very well because we've seen how difficult the situation was in the Philippines last year when the lockdowns were so extreme, and the Philippine economy was hurt probably more than any other economy in Southeast Asia. So if we talk about investment in public health, making sure that there's enough space for those who are hit severely by COVID that they can be treated, and investment in vaccines so that enough booster shots can get out to the elderly, get out to the young, those who are at a high risk of COVID. This is very, very critical, and I think needs a very, very high priority, high attention.
Okay, so still some risks on the table there. Time to stay safe for everyone watching. Thank you so much, Stephen Cochrane, Chief Economist for Asia Pacific over at Moody's Analytics.
Thank you.
Now, Congress will convene as the National Board of Canvassers this morning. That's for the official counting of votes for the incoming president and vice president. The joint session will be opened at 10 a.m. by Senate President Tito Soto and House Speaker Alan Velasco, who will preside over the approval of canvassing rules. The Joint Canvassing Committee will be created afterwards. Senator Mig Zubiri, who is set to be co-chair of the committee, expects canvassing to be finished within 2 days.
We will entertain all objections. We will look if the objections are valid objections. We will answer them as properly as possible. We will come up with the most accurate, detailed number of votes per COC. We will not shortcut the process.
And in other news, motorists are seeing mixed movements in fuel prices today. Shaila Francisco has the full story.
After a rollback last week, gasoline prices per liter increased by almost 4 pesos, while prices of kerosene and diesel rolled back by more than 2 pesos. The Energy Department explains that higher demand for gasoline pushed the prices up.
Magkaiba yung galaw kasi magkaiba din yung kanilang pangangailangan. May mga bansa na talagang mas magasolina ang kanilang pangangailangan na sa United States, di ba? Palapit yung summer nila. So ibig sabihin, karamihan sa mga tao sa United States or even sa European countries, nagbabakasyon sila. So yun ang tinatawag na driving season.
The agency advises motorists to plan their itinerary ahead and to lighten vehicle load to lessen fuel consumption. The LTFRB, for its part, is in talks with the transport sector to manage routes amid the influx of commuters.
Meron po nakikita tayong paggalaw ng demand in a specific route or specific area. Para ma-address po yung paggalaw na iyon, is kailangan namin i-coordinate yan sa mga operators natin.
Aside from oil price hike, motorists using the Manila-Cavite Toll Expressway or Cavitex will also have to deal with higher toll fees. Since Sunday, prices have increased by 8 to 25 pesos.
Kailangan po kasi nating balansehin din naman ang interest ng ating motorista at ang interest din naman po ng ating mga investors.
PUV drivers and operators may opt to get discounts and rebates under the government's Toll Reprieve program. Shaila Francisco, we are One News.
Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up after that. We'll check how our local shares are moving this morning. That's after fears of a new COVID-19 surge rattled the market yesterday.
More of that and other stories when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us.
still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Okay, just when we thought markets were so over the COVID count, fears of another surge shook the bourse yesterday. Tell us more, Dan.
Well, Jess, that is exactly what Papa Security says rocked the rally. The health department reporting yesterday 191 new COVID-19 cases in the country last week. And then you've got 55 of these new cases in Metro Manila alone. So more than 2,200 na yung active cases right now. And then Octa Research saying that they forecast another possible wave or surge, Jess, in May or June. And you can see my local bourse here opening in the red. The composite down by 7/10. Or now 0.8%. And you know, we were just talking about this offline. Will there be a vote of confidence here due to the appointment of Balisacan? You know, all of these things get mismatched with all of this new strain, which is of course this contagious Omicron subvariant. It's now the dominant one in the United States. Nevertheless, let's take a quick peek at how we are opening and the movers of this morning. And this comes, of course, as there are more IPOs in the offing. You've got Upson International there. That announced on Monday that it had filed an IPO that's going to be around 4.88 billion pesos. They, of course, retail personal computers, other IT products. They are planning to open 250 branches over the next 3 to 5 years and list on September. And just speaking of ICT, very quick peek here on Converge. Very interestingly, one of the worst performers yesterday and continuing on that slump. Take a look at that. Down by 7 7/7% already. Now, yesterday, we did report Warburg Pincus exited from Converge with a 6.5 billion peso share sale. They offered it at 25 pesos each, and you can see the share price moving towards that price. That was a close to 5% discount to what it was trading on a Monday. And after this, Warburg Pincus will no longer hold any Converge shares after that deal. So what happened to those shares? Converge will be buying that back from Warburg Pincus. They said that they have enough retained earnings to afford that and that the capex will be continued to be fully funded. After which, there will be 30% float for more investors to be buying from the public, of course. But as mentioned, Converge continuing in that free fall, closing in to 25 pesos per share, Jess.
COVID-19 cases in the Philippines are again on the rise. The health department has registered over 1,200 new COVID cases. That's from May 16 to 22. This is nearly 10% higher compared to the previous week's tally. Octa Research Group said the emerging new Omicron subvariant may be the reason behind the new spike.
Epekto ito ng panibagong subvariant rather than yung sa election. Bakit hindi sa election? Kasi since February naman may mga campaign rallies na tayo, may mga sorties tayo. Tapos hindi naman tayo nakakita ng pagtaas ng bilang ng kaso.
National Task Force Medical Advisor Ted Herbosa said the new BA.4 subvariant is 20 to 30% more transmissible compared to other subvariants. That's on top of the possibility that it could escape the protection provided by existing vaccines. That's why Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion recommended that the second booster shot be given as soon as possible to those aged 50 and above.
Kasi itong mga 50 years and above, karamihan dyan mga economic frontliners natin no, sa mga private sector. At importante na habang sila nasa trabaho ay protektado sila kasi itong mga COVID cases halos muted naman pero may mga bagong variants dumarating.
Now, the health department is urging the public to strictly observe minimum public health standards as a precaution to the re-emerging monkeypox disease. Health Undersecretary Abdullah Dumama says monkeypox is less contagious and less severe than smallpox, but he said that the government will still strengthen its border screening processes to avoid the entry of the disease into the country.
Ang unang kaso po ng monkeypox sa ating sa tao po ay naitala noong 1970. Pwede po itong maipasa, una, human to human. Kung human to human, it's through droplets, body fluids, or infected skin na may crack, contaminated clothing or linen. Ay animal to human. Pwede pong kagat o bite ng human o scratches, animal to human, raw or minimally processed wild meat o contaminated materials.
For his part, NTF Medical Advisor Dr. Ted Herbosa assures the public there's no need to close the country's borders despite the detection of monkeypox in other countries.
Nakita niyo naman, ang pagsara ng borders, malaki ang epekto sa turismo, ekonomiya, at saka supply chain ng ating mga goods and services. So hindi sapat or hindi tama na dapat mag-close down dahil parang sinabi mo lang may outbreak ng bulutong tubig sa ibang parte ng mundo. Magbabantay rin tayo at maghahanda tayo ng preparedness.
And that's a first look into the business day this Tuesday, May 24, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.